Why do good people make bad things? The dynamic of well-intentioned designers and engineers who build things that are supposed to make life better, but instead, to their horror, make life worse, is an ongoing theme throughout the history of HCI. It is often the case that good technologies keep ending up accidentally evil. This paper sheds a small but pointed light at this phenomenon, in particular in the smart home co-design space. In this paper, we reflectively look back at 4 design scenarios that were created by participants through a smart home IoT kit of our own design. We retell these design scenarios because they ended up accidentally evil. We analyze them through the analytic lens of questionable values and provide ways to break the toxic cycle of good technologies for the smart home ending up accidentally evil. Involving people into design supports the articulation of heterogeneous values and provides the opportunity to create better products. Participatory design is responsible technology design. To that end, we created a generic smart home IoT toolkit that would empower people to create idiosyncratic smart home ideas and foster data literacy. And indeed, participants created a plethora of quirky and idiosyncratic smart home design scenarios. We reported on the inflatable cat smart home device 4 years ago. We argue that in the past, design researchers, just as ourselves, may have highlighted design scenarios in line with good values and underreported on instances where participants created questionable design scenarios. Because these were also created with our smart home IoT toolkit, and thus we speculate this has happened to other researchers as well. The home is our most private space and increasingly populated with smart sensors to increase energy efficiency or to increase security. Using sensor readings to increase efficiency is relatively easy as they can be numerically operationalized. For example, low energy consumption is good and high energy consumption is bad. However, personal and social goals, beliefs, ethics and values do not follow a numerical dichotomy. Delegating home security to a smart lock can be simultaneously based on the common value security while undermining other values. For example, parents interested in auditing home entries may be in conflict with their teen children's expectations of privacy. We take John Wine's questionable values as a point of departure and propose questionable values as an analytic lens to describe when the values of trustworthiness, transparency, openness, and responsibility and the subsequent obligations are violated. We use the descriptor questionable to describe when taken for granted values that we researchers deem as good are irritated, infringed, or violated through the use of a smart home design. Questionable values as an analytic lens enables a nuanced understanding of the multiple layers of interests, conflicts, and contradictions at play between all involved stakeholders. We created a smart home IoT toolkit for people to create smart home design scenarios in their own homes with direct access to live and historic sensor readings of simple sensors such as light, movement, or temperature. It only became clear in the subsequent analysis of these deployments that participants understood that the sensor data could be used for a variety of questionable smart home scenarios. This insight became the basis for the paper at hand. In revisiting all field notes from all previously published and unpublished deployments, we found 17 design scenarios with questionable values. All these scenarios were created and used by participants. We did not encourage them to experiment around possible questionable values and explicitly asked them to only use our smart home IoT toolkit with the informed consent of others being subject to its sensing capabilities. We retell 4 pertinent examples at length in the paper where participants use the smart home IoT toolkit to surveil, nudge, and control others. For example, this scenario followed values of efficiency and compliance, while at the same time being technologically unfeasible. At first, nudging does not seem very questionable, but it shows how persuasion design normalizes disproportionate use of technology to grasp human attention in exchange for very little benefit. Here, a loose relation of movement data is seemingly enough to nag their fellow occupants to do the right thing, regardless of their intentions. Using such fuzzy data unrightfully objectifies people and tasks, but also normalizes technologically control through unfeasible means. Our participants nudged their fellow occupants because they themselves are conditioned by smart home notifications to optimize their lives. Additionally, discourses around smart technology are overpromising while pretending a miraculous future has already arrived. One participant corrected their partner's careless behavior regarding the light in the corridor, which he forgot to turn off. She confronted him with the light sensor data visualization, indicating when the light was switched on by him and that it was on for hours while he was in another room. Materiality in smart home design is usually not questioned, but it is this very IoT material that affords these types of ideas. Here, the materiality of numerical sensor calculations is read as a switched on light and subsequently interpreted as a partner who wastes energy. Some scenarios may be accidentally discovered, but the fully functional toolkit enabled such scenarios by design. These scenarios were then actively used and actively communicated back to us researchers. In that, we see a slippery slope from accidentally discovering a functionality to intentionally abusing it. We argue that these scenarios were pre-mediated by the material of the smart home IoT toolkit, normalized by the dominant narratives of efficiency and productivity, and afforded by our own assumptions and fallacies stemming from assumptions on materiality, assumptions on narratives, and assumptions on design practice. So what to do about it? We asked design researchers to create space for questionable values to arise in participatory research. Do not downplay the thorny encounters. Instead, take our study as a case exemplar and revisit past deployments to report on less favorable design scenarios that have been created but not reported. Create design workshops for participants to reflect on questionable scenarios. In so doing, participants can openly explore questionable scenarios, collaboratively understand their ramifications, and critically reflect on the values adhered or sacrificed. Likewise, we ask design researchers to more closely collaborate with researchers from law, philosophy, and ethics as to seek guidance in navigating critical scenarios arising from participatory design practice. There is an opportunity to design functional sensing devices that question dominant logics of surveillance and control. And thus we ask design research to look the other way and to create probe tools that actively probe into the logics of surveillance, nudging, and control of others, making questionable use apparent and inevitable. Further, we may create sensors that produce fuzzy data that makes certain activities impossible to measure, or sensors that would invert or subvert objectification. Such speculative sensors may only measure once per day, or sensors could be split into several discrete sensors so that one can only measure activity while the other can only measure stillness, but have to be read by two different parties. Another example, a movement sensor that, in order to function, has to be labeled by participants and their housemates in discrete steps, like hectic or quiet. We also ask to include value discourses into IoT devices. One example could be to ask participants to use sensors to save energy in a privacy-friendly way and in a way that would be more intrusive in order to reflect on both. Future users may also design their own smart home in a value-sensible way, for example by preventing raw data access, making data accessible only in a 4i principle, or to include fake data or to mute data. We urge designers to engage in public discourse around what sensors can do and what people think they do. Sensing is believing, and thus we ultimately argue for design research to take a step forward and advocate in public discourses for smart home sensor technology that ultimately respects the humane condition.